If we didn't, you know, if they didn't have those experiences, if you took that baby and, you know, isolated it and not let it even touch itself or see anything or whatever, you wouldn't have somebody that saw the reality that we have, because they would not have learned it. They wouldn't have built up the algorithms that say, oh, you know, this pattern of neurons and those pulses mean this, you know. They wouldn't have that. So that's how we learn it. It's not the brain that's learning it. The brain is just our constraint on what we can do with our thought, because we're in this virtual reality, and the physics, when I say physics, I'm a physicist, so everything that science is physics, right? Biology is physics, everything's physics, because physics is elementary particles, atoms, molecules, all that stuff, and all the biology and everything's built out of that. So the basic physics defines what we can do and what we can't do. We can't jump 20 feet in the air. Okay, why not? Because the rule set doesn't support it. The rule set says we have constraints. See? So we can't necessarily score you know, IQs of 200, because the rule set says that the brains we have and the experiences we've had and the training we've had won't support it. So we can't do that. It's a limitation. If we get a brain tumor, the rule set says we no longer can think very well or see very well, or we're not coordinated anymore because we've lost some of the ability we had, because now we have new constraints. So you see how it all kind of ties together and solves all these various problems. It solves problems of physics. Those are problems with these, what they call anomalous experiments that don't have any solutions. It explains what the Buddha was talking about. And it all kind of boils down to this nice little concept of entropy. The larger consciousness system trying to evolve to survive, and we're part of it. Now here's one that will probably twist your mind even a little bit more if it hasn't been twisted enough already. And that is that the larger consciousness system is finite. Okay? It has to be finite because it's real. Anything real has to be finite. You cannot have something real that's infinite. Now you can use infinite as a metaphor, meaning very, very big beyond all imagination, and you can't even comprehend, you know, how big it is. All right, we call that infinite, but that's just a metaphor. There is no actual thing as infinite. Infinite is just a math word that says bigger than anything can possibly get. See, it's not possible to be infinite, because if you were infinite, you always add another thing, and then now you've got a new infinite. You see, it's not a thing you can ever get to. In math, you can only approach infinity asymptotically. You never actually can get there. So nothing real can be infinite. Now, as soon as we say that the larger conscious system is finite, everybody says, yeah, well, then what's outside of it? You know, it's got boundaries. It's finite. It's got an edge. Well, you can't know. It's beyond. We are consciousness. You can't see consciousness objectively unless you're outside of consciousness. If you are consciousness, you can't get outside of consciousness. Now, you can get outside of this reality frame, fine. This is just one of hundreds of reality frames. The dream frame is another one. And you can pop out of this one and go to any of the other ones, because you're still in consciousness, but you can't get outside of consciousness. So the best thing we can do when we're talking about the larger consciousness system is make a model. Okay, we have to just model it, but we can't really see what's behind the model. You only model effects. So this theory of mine is just a model. You know, this is how I model reality. What makes a model a good model or a bad model is whether or not it answers, you know, the questions. A good model has to compute, or has to, what do you call it, derive everything that you know to be true. All the experiments we've done, things we know, like, you know, gravity, things drop. We'll never let go of something and have it go up. Okay, that's fact we know. So your model has to be able to explain everything we know, and your model has to be able to explain things we don't know, novel things, and then those things we don't know have to be found out experimentally. That's a good model. Okay, and it's just a model though. There's no way to get behind consciousness. So you get to a point where you just have to say, I just don't know what's outside of that conscious system. There's no way of telling, because logically you can't get outside to look at it, because we're it. Now, in a logic class, what they tell you is that the subset can't define the superset, because the subset's just a subset. It doesn't have all the data in it that the superset has. So we're in a subset. What's out there? Who knows? Now we can make it. We can make things up. You know, we can have conjecture about things like that, but it's just conjecture. Okay, more questions? Yeah.
Would you say that our intent could bend the rules sometimes? I mean, or maybe bend our perception of reality within those rules sometimes?
Sure.
I'll give you an example that I never shared because it sounded so crazy, but I think this might be the place.
You can't get any crazier than me, right? What can you say that's stranger than what I just said already?
This happened not too long ago, and I was pulling through the parking lot of the grocery store, intent on getting where I needed to be at a certain time. And as I passed by this row of parked cars, a van threw it in reverse. I was already committed to passing them, and they hit the gas really fast, and I could see they were going to hit my car. And I said, in my head, maybe out loud, I don't know, I said, no! And looked in my rearview mirror at the time that I saw the van back through the back of my car. Not hit me, not into, not behind. It backed through the back of my car, and I just kept driving going, what was that? You know, but my intent was very strong that
yes.
I didn't have time to call and get an accident report and the insurance company. I had to go.
Yes, I've heard multiple stories about things like that. A lady told me a very similar one, that she was driving a car, and she says she was awake, she was clear, she was focused. It was not like she was driving in a fog or just left the party or something. She was in the middle of the day, middle of the morning, and an old couple pulled out of a side road right in front of her. And she says there was absolutely nothing that she could do. And they became eyeball to eyeball, because she was bearing down right on the door frame where the old man was sitting behind the wheel. And she said she went right through him. And there was a flash of light, and she came out the other side. And after that, she says she was so shaken and she was so rattled that she pulled the car, over the first chance and just sat there and shook for a while. So you're not the only person to have that experience. I've had that.
Like a rearrangement.
A half a dozen people have told me things like that. You can modify it. See, if we had lived in an objective reality, that would be impossible. And that's why people would say you were nuts. You imagined it, you made that up. You thought it was really close and it looked like that, but it really wasn't, you see, because we live in objective reality and that can't happen. We don't live in objective reality, and some very strange things can happen. And the way that works is, there is everything. Physicists will tell you that quantum mechanics is a science that applies to the very small. Only little tiny things, obey quantum mechanics. It's not true. Everything obeys quantum mechanics. It's a general principle that applies to everything. And just like the double slit experiment that the physicists did that created quantum mechanics, you do the same thing. When there is choices to be made of what's going to happen, your intent and the intent of everybody else involved actually develops the choices that you have then for the outcome of that thing. And yes, you had an intent and it was very strong. The future probability was changed. And the way that works is you reach up into that probability distribution and you pull out a sample. And that's your measurement. That then is what comes into this as a physical event. Just like in quantum mechanics, they measure that particle. And once they measure that particle there, it becomes a particle in this reality frame. Okay, you made the measurement, you pulled out the probability. Now, that may have been 1 in 1,000, may have been 1 in 1,000,000. Well, that's the way it is when you go sample a probability distribution. Sometimes you get something out under the tail. Sometimes, most of the time, you get something in under the fat part of the curve. That's just the nature of sampling probability distribution. Well, you just pulled one out under the tail. Very good luck, but now luck is made with positive intent, you see. That's the thing. You can change how that probability distribution gets sampled. You can get the result changed by your intent. So yes, I've heard that story several times. And again, you ask people, said, well, couldn't you have been mistaken? Weren't you a little foggy in the mind, and then this is just the way you remembered it later? And I've gotten it enough that it's clear to me that these people experienced exactly what they said they experienced. And the one that I'm telling you about, wasn't even something hitting the back end or tail. This was right straight through, middle to middle, and came out the other side. It's just a strange thing. We live in a probabilistic reality. That's why that robot walks off the table. In a objective world, that can't happen. In an objective world, you can't take old hospital records and, make the people get out of the hospital sooner with your intent. You just can't do that in an objective world. But yet it's been done over and over and over again. So you do that once, and well, that's another thing I should say. You can only modify reality within the natural probability in the system.
So it's not bending the rules. It's
No.
just a
You still have those two rules. You cannot violate the historical continuity, okay, and you cannot violate the rule set. There can be nothing left over in this reality that proves that you did either one of those. But there isn't, see? I mean, who's going to believe you, right? That's not evidence.
No.
You see?
I know. That's why I
So
haven't
there's
seen
no
it.
evidence that contradicts the rule set. There's no evidence that says somehow historical continuity was violated. None at all. So if it doesn't violate either one of those, it's possible. Now you still just have to grab the right number to make that work. You may not make it work every time, but you did that time. That's
And it
how-
was, amazing and empowering all at the same time.
Suddenly you realize that reality is not at all the way they told you in school, right? And that's a big eye-opener. Yeah. Well, there's lots of these experiments with things like that happen. Synchronicity comes out of that same thing. Okay, more questions?
If I understand your interpretation of what happened to her
Mhm.
within your model, you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, that her single word of intent, which was no, disrupted all the probability patterns of all those subatomic particles that make up atoms that made up her car and that other person's car in just the right way that those two vehicles pass through each other.
Yeah. No?
Is that what you're saying?
No, you don't have to. See, what you're doing is trying to impose the physical on what's basically non-physical. You don't need to rearrange all those atoms. They're all just virtual atoms anyway, and they're just virtual cars. You see? All you have to do is change the result. Here's an example. Right now, there's no reason why the virtual reality here should have to render any oxygen for us.
Okay.
And you think, well, if it doesn't render any oxygen in our reality, we're all going to die, right? No, it only has to render the result of there being oxygen. Okay, so what that means is that we take a measurement, take a breath, right? No, we don't fall over dead. That's the measurement. The result was there's oxygen. Why? Not because there's rendering oxygen all over the place that we just breathed in. That's confusing a physical reality when it's just a virtual reality. The reason we don't drop over dead is because we made the measurement and it's probable that there's oxygen here. That's why we don't drop over dead. And why is it probable? Because the rule set says there's enough plankton, there's enough trees, with the rest of it, that there should be oxygen here. Okay, so that's the probability. And that probability is a real big one. That's a curve. It goes like this, and a real big sharp peak because yes. So every time we make that measurement, we get the same answer, just because it's probable. So what happened was that these two cars were on a collision course, and the effect was that they didn't have the collision. It's not that atoms had to change, because atoms are just virtual. All it is data. So the result was rendered. Didn't violate any history, didn't violate any rule sets. Now, had there been people standing on that street corner with their cameras running, say the movie guys were there, and they just happened to be taking pictures of all of this. Uh-oh, now we have a problem. Now we're going to leave some evidence that's going to violate the rule set, right? Won't happen. Bang! You're going to get a crash. Just like those guys couldn't change that data once that data come into this reality. So the reason that it didn't, that it could do that was a possibility, is that it didn't violate those two rules.